Well, coming to you from the Toby Family Auditorium at the Commonwealth Club, it's Week to Week, the political roundtable from the Commonwealth Club for Tuesday, June 26, 2018. Welcome everybody to our program. Glad to see you here. This week we had an edifying experience of watching the President of the United States attack a Virginia chicken restaurant as, quote, filthy, unquote, after one of his staffers was refused service there. Now, news quickly came out that the President's own crown jewel of Mar-a-Lago in Florida actually is filthy, having been cited 78 times over 3 years for health code violations, including kitchen staff not washing their hands and black-green mold-like substance on the ice machine. Yum. See, makes me feel a little bit better that we ran out of food out there, right? You never know what you're eating. If you've been following the story about these Challenger coins, or the Challenge coins, whatever they are, so they made one that features Mar-a-Lago. If you get it, wash your hands. I'm John Zipper, your host for Week to Week, and the Commonwealth Club's Vice President of Media and Editorial. On today's program, we are going to discuss immigration, San Francisco's mayor and local politics, the Blue Surge, service to people coming into your chicken restaurant, and much more. Commonwealth Club welcomes people with a wide range of views, so any opinions expressed up here are, of course, those of the speakers and not of the Commonwealth Club. Now let's meet our panelists for today. And I have to admit this, I'm very glad to have all of them here. I always want to point out that we do generally try to have women and men on our panel. Sometimes it does not work out. This is, don't email me. Okay, starting on the far end of our stage, Dr. James Taylor. He's a political analyst and a professor of politics at the University of San Francisco. He's on Twitter at Oodie, that's O-O-T-I-E. So welcome back, James.
Thank you. Thank you.
Joining us for the first time is Joe Fitzgerald Rodriguez. He's a political reporter right here in town for the San Francisco Examiner. He's on Twitter at FitzTheReporter. So welcome to the panel, Joe. And next to me is our returning champ, Dr. Larry Gersten, political analyst for NBC Bay Area. He's also a professor emeritus of political science at the San Jose State University. He's on Twitter at LGersten, so welcome back. I think you all know how we do this. There are question cards spread throughout the room. Write down any questions you have. Someone will pick them up and deliver them to me, and I will try to ask as many as possible during our program. Speaking of our program, let's start with border politics, immigration, and there have been a number of developments. One most recently was actually the U.S. Supreme Court today handed down a ruling that, you all saw this, I'm sure, that let stand the president's the president's travel ban. This is the ban on immigration from 7 mostly Muslim countries, none of which happen to have a Trump hotel, apparently. It's a victory that brought cheer to the president. He rallied about it today on Twitter. And the president's gone through a rather public relations ringer for the past couple of weeks over his controversial zero-tolerance policy at the border, which included separating immigrant parents from their children when they were caught trying to enter the United States. Starting with James, what did you think of the Supreme Court ruling? And was this really a victory for the president, or have we moved beyond that?
No, I think it was a victory for Donald Trump and for his administration. This kind of validates his idea that he has the right as president to oversee immigration. I think in a real way, though, he didn't win the war. I think this is sort of the reflection, the artifact of, say, Mitch McConnell and the whole Neil Gorsuch situation, in which they basically stole the seat, the Supreme Court seat, to hold it for an occasion such as this. So I really do think that going forward, Donald Trump can celebrate and boast this temporary victory, but I don't think it will be a win in the long run, because he's actually celebrating the least of 3 different options and proposals, and he's actually celebrating it as if this is the one he really wanted, when it's the one he least wanted. Yeah. But because he won, he's just going to ride with it. And that's what he's doing. So it's sort of an accident that happened on the way to 1600 Pennsylvania Avenue this morning. And Donald Trump sort of said, okay, since it happened, I'll take credit for it, like he did no airplane crashes and the black unemployment rates.
Joe or Larry, any thoughts on the Supreme Court ruling?
Well, I mean, it's definitely not just the ruling, but what's going to happen in terms of the border. We see these, basically concentration camp-esque locations that are going to open up across the United States. He's bringing his policies here to home. And when you see that in your community, when we see in Concord, just not 24 miles east of where we're sitting right now, 47,000 people who may be detained there, that's going to be in our backyards. We're all going to see that. You all are going to see that. And all of a sudden, his policies will become even more real. Think of how many people that will galvanize against him and against Republicans.
Larry?
I think it's both a symbolic victory and a substantive victory for Trump. Substantively, of course, because the courts have for some time given the president the leeway when it comes to these kinds of foreign policy questions. And, we may think that the president's powers are too broad, but the courts have given in to that for some time. So, and Congress has been extraordinarily reluctant to challenge him. So that was not a surprise to me. It was a given as far as I was concerned. But the symbolic victory, I think, in some ways is so much more important because it ties in with what you were talking about. It ties in with his anti-immigrant stance. We got to keep him coming in from the Middle East. We got to keep them coming in from Asia, keep them coming in from Mexico and Central America. We make America great again by keeping minorities out. And this is the kind of thing that shines a light on what he's been doing with the border here and really kind of change the narrative, at least for a day or two.
Let's talk a bit about more about the zero tolerance policy, which has been, so he signed an executive order. Did it suspend that, or did it actually change the administration's policy on separating children? Does anyone know
We're still waiting.
Yeah?
Nobody knows exactly what it means. It's a very vague order. HHS has said, we're working on it. All the other folks revolving around this, Homeland Security says, we're waiting for HHS. I mean, there is no clear, definitive ruling on whether he's going to continue. The other day they had, I think it was 70 people come in, for this whole idea of, let's plead guilty and leave. And there was no ability to prosecute them. And so the charges were dismissed, to which, of course, the president's press secretary was asked, well, does this mean the president changed his policy and that he's no longer going to prosecute these people? That used to be the case under the Obama thing. It was called, catch and release. It's not a particularly kind phrase, but it means you have them come in, you charge them, and they go away awaiting their presence before the courts, their appearance. In this case, it's catch and hold, right? And so the other day they let 70 go. And so now the question is, will this repeat itself, or will this thing actually be just a temporary situation?
Well, we've seen a lot of stories over the past year, but especially I think the last few months, about people who had been in that kind of limbo of they've had an order of removal placed on them, and they've been either working through the process or there have been problems in the process, and they're picked up taking their kid to school or delivering a pizza or whatever. Go ahead.
I just want to add one thing, John. This is problematic in a lot of ways. And, a lot of us have very humanistic response to this, especially when we see these kids and whatnot. But if you look at the bigger picture, you can begin to see why the president is making the claims that he makes. And by the way, so many of the things he says aren't true. Okay, let's just make that clear. That's not me. That's not me. That's PolitiFact. Just go look it up. But the one thing that's interesting here is that it takes up to 5 years before these people who were charged actually appear. And that has the president going nuts.
And I want to just add real quickly that the way in which race is functioning in this situation is that the president is throwing all Latinx people in a Procrustean bed as one. Mm-hmm. He's doing the same thing that many people in this country do with regard to crime in bad neighborhoods. Everybody there is guilty. They're not the victims of the bad crime going on. They are all involved in the crime. It's how in this country George Bush could put Saddam Hussein and bin Laden in the same sentence. Racism takes care of that. How do you get MS-13? How do you get border crossing people illegally into the same conversation as asylum? They are completely unrelated pursuits. Someone crossing the border illegally, we know that in California well. This doesn't appear to be exactly that same phenomena. These are people coming to surrender themselves for a judicial process. This is not like we see the signs down in San Diego of the family running across the freeway.
Right. These are people actually applying for asylum.
And yet racism in America that Donald Trump can reliably rely on will take care of the work for him. No one will do the distinguishing work of separating MS-13 as an American phenomenon that went, that went back to El Salvador, came back to America, and that the MS-13 is an American gang like the Crips and the Bloods and the El Rookins are. And yet, because of racism, the MS-13 is Salvadoran.
MS-13 started in Los Angeles.
Right, in the parking lot. So to me, I'll shut up 1 second. To me, a lot of what is happening by default is Donald Trump is just throwing things out and just relying on old school American racism to do the rest of the work for him.
And it's not the first time, by far. I mean, I'm Puerto Rican. My family, my extended family is all in Puerto Rico and had to suffer the consequences of Donald Trump's racism and the consequences of Donald Trump's hate. And what we see there and what we're seeing now is just all of America giving him, well, not all of America, but America giving him that blanket pass. And it is just, my family has felt that devastation, and Latinos all over are continuing to feel that.
I'm Norwegian. I've never had a problem.
Right.
Can I join your side?
Right.
But look.
He'll let more of you come in.
That's why I said it. That I'm not Norwegian.
And I think,
but there's no question to the truth of what you say. The United States in 1990 was 76% non-Hispanic white. Today, the United States, as of 2015, is 60% non-Hispanic white. Well, that's bothering a lot of people. Yeah. And if you put all these things together, whether it's the attitude toward the Muslims, whether it's the attitude toward the folks coming in from Central America or Asia, for that matter, and whether it's the question of 500,000 people here temporarily because of wars, terrorism, or natural disasters, the president, is telling must leave. Guess what? There's no Norwegians there.
Right. And what's phenomenal is if he deported every brown person in America today that is not here legally, do you realize the impact of the population projections that you suggest won't be affected at all? Because the real issue related to American population declines amongst the majority white population has to do with birth rates.
That's right.
Not immigration. It's sex. Excuse my language. It has more to do with sex love than it does immigration policy. And that's what some people who have been able to panoramically step back from all of this have suggested, that this is a conversation between white men and white women that they need to have about family. About family and feminism.
Take it to your people.
About feminism and family in relationship to birth rates, because this is really ominous. In 33 states of the 50 United States of America, the white population is dying faster than it's being born in most of America. So that's the real crisis we're facing, and it's a legitimate crisis amongst whites in America that we do have. But having Donald Trump and Steve Miller, is that his name, Miller?
Miller. Stephen Miller, yeah.
And others, Gorsuch and others, articulate how we should negotiate this moment of transition as a people is the real problem we have. And I'm one of the few people who said repeatedly since Donald Trump was elected that we are just as inclined to go toward an apartheid society soon as we are to go toward a Brazilian model of racial democracy. We're on the precipice of going one way or the other. Either it's Obama, and that's the real who we are, or it's Trump, and that's the real who we are. But we'll find out in the next 10 years or so which of these two current paths we've chosen we're going to stick with.
Before you all go off and have sex, I do want to got some really good questions here.
And please not now.
One person points out, considering the Supreme Court support for the travel ban, lots of questions tonight. This is great. What sort of decisions do we expect on upcoming cases, about immigration and similar things, such as the Dreamers, that gets to them. Sanctuary state laws, certainly will be headed there in one way or another. Is this all going to come down to Gorsuch and not Merrick, Garland, or do you think there could be some?
It's more than Gorsuch. I'm sorry. I mean, Bob, although I think there's a great reason for people to be upset about the way that Mitch McConnell handled that for all kinds of reasons. But it's so much more than one member of the Supreme Court. I mean, and frankly, I'm going to say something that won't make a lot of friends, but my belief is if this Dreamer case ever gets to the U.S. Supreme Court, and it's working its way there now, I would expect the court to uphold the president's reaction to rescind it, simply because that executive order was also written the same way in the other direction by Obama. So if a president writes an executive order extending this right, a president can write an executive order taking it away.
And basically what they're ruling...
Please don't walk out of here saying Larry Gerson's a rabid racist, but clearly if you're trying to understand how the court works, I fully expect that to happen. The question is whether Congress will get its act together, and there's a vote scheduled for tomorrow, and I got to tell you, don't be betting on it, because the likelihood is that they won't, and so this is the problem.
And that's because the Supreme Court is ruling on whether or not he has the power to do that, and they're basically saying, well, yeah, duh, it's an executive order.
I think so.
Interestingly, your comment about Congress, did you see the column by George Will, longtime conservative columnist this week? Yes, earlier this week, I think, or over the weekend, saying you should vote the Republicans out of office in November because they have not, in Congress, they have not lived up to their role, their constitutional role, to stand up to the president.
Well, see, this is what I mean by Trump won the war, won this battle, but not the war, is a lot of people are upset today. In New York City, people marched in mass. People went to Stephen Miller's apartment today and marched outside of his apartment in D.C. That tells me that people are galvanized. They're doing all kinds of, I'm too old to know the language, to Google and finding neighborhoods and finding these people's houses. And I really do think that while Donald Trump is slam dunking or throwing down the football and doing a dance in the end zone today, so is the mobilization of young people around guns, women around women issues, immigration advocates around DACA and immigration issues. So Trump thinks he's winning. He's kind of winning in a Charlie Sheen kind of way. When Charlie thought he was winning and then they said positive and all of a sudden it's like, oh, guess what, Charlie, you weren't winning. I think Donald Trump in a real way thinks he's winning, but in the long run, people are going to be mobilized by this decision today to get out in November and try to change the situation. So again, Donald Trump is going to celebrate today, but in the long run, I think it actually horrified people enough today to actually mobilize them to vote.
But it's also fostering people locally to and not to disagree.
No, please do.
But in fostering people locally to attack some of these policies, like Sanctuary City, we had Angela Alioto trying to kind of dismantle parts of San Francisco's Sanctuary City law by putting something on the ballot that would weaken it. And I mean, this was ostensibly, she argued, for felons, but coming into the country a second time is a felony. So anyone who has jumped the border more than once is by nature a felon. And then we have someone trying to dismantle protections for them in Sanctuary City here in liberal San Francisco. So, there may be fights abroad, but there's fights on this at home.
And then add that to the president's comments yesterday about eliminating due process. Again, most Americans are sitting back like, oh, this isn't real. This is just kind of but Donald Trump seems to be doing test runs. He seems to be testing the limits of what the majority, and again, I don't mean to be offensive, but what the majority white public will allow. He's trying to push to see how far they will allow minorities to be affected by these policies before they push back electorally or in other ways and putting pressure on others before he backs off. And I think that's where we are.
Before we move on, Larry.
I'm going to be the contrarian for a moment here. Sure. Not because I like it, but I think it needs to be said. We live in this massive blue bubble, not only California, but this part of California. My God, it's so blue. I mean, teal is outlawed here.
Cities are bubbles, Larry. Cities are bubbles.
Okay, so
They're all liberal.
So the point I'm trying to make, though, is that while we look at these things as opportunities for the great blue wave, I know you want to talk about this later, that may be coming. I want to tell you something. Donald Trump is very smart. And, you know, his tweets aren't spelled right, this and that. We tend to write him off. And I believe that this is a very, very calculated effort on him to orchestrate the red wave, to get all those people who feel they've lost their jobs, largely working class whites, not all, but many males who thought they've lost their jobs because immigrants are taking them. We know that's not the case, but we also know that's how these people feel. And he wants to get them out to vote in November. Mm-hmm. So while we're all looking for that blue wave, watch out. You may see a red tidal wave coming the other way.
See, but I think Trump is underestimating the intelligence of American voting behavior. In other words, as you know better than I do, the whole idea of rewards and punishments, electoral rewards and punishments. At what point does the common sense of America, we've always been able to rely on in terms of punishing sitting presidents in midterm elections, kick in? Why? In other words, Bush and Obama are the only two presidents in the past 50 years to actually gain seats after midterms in their first cycles of governing. So we should be able to say reliably that Donald Trump will lose the House. And yet, because of this Nixonian idea of the silent majority that Trump relies on every day, he's not worried about it. He's throwing it on the wall and hopes it's enough to get people to think, yeah, well, I've been feeling this way about immigration too. And yeah, Kate Steinle in San Francisco, that's right. And all these other examples. And he had last week a few families of victims out on stage with him, which I thought was really beneath the presidency to do this under those circumstances.
Explain what that was. These were people who
yeah, these were people whose family members were victimized by people who are undocumented here. And of course, he had a group of people. There was one black dude up there, and he was the only person without a sign. I happen to notice that, without a picture of his child. Everybody else did. But the idea that the president would use the bully pulpit like this, FDR has to be rolling over in his grave. And Ronald Reagan does too. And that's hard to get those two to agree on anything.
Well, while we're on this, the wave idea or topic, what role do you think the economy is going to play also in perhaps helping that red wave come out? Because the economy is very strong right now. You know, unemployment is low, you know, allegedly in the full employment area.
Yeah, but unemployment numbers are always very sticky, right? It's about how many people have dropped out of that race looking for employment.
But in all honesty, everyone says that when the other party's in power,
Sure.
and the numbers
Sure.
are low. By most measures, maybe I can say that, the economy tends to be rated as doing fairly well right now.
Yeah, but with these tariffs, with the increase of, we've gone into greater debt under this man than anybody else. Everyone seems to think it's just no big, once again, Americans being Americans, no big deal, it'll all work itself out. This man and Paul Ryan in January increased the national debt by $1.3 trillion. And then added another $600 billion in a spending bill, and everybody's cool. Trump's got the lowest unemployment rates in 50 years. Everything is great. And I just see this storm. I'm not an economist, but I see this, there'll be a reckoning for this, especially when it comes to the tariffs and their impacts in certain areas throughout the economy. We already see Harley-Davidson leaving, and Trump is now in a back and forth.
When have you ever seen a reckoning on Trump for anything, really? His house organ, Fox News, controls the information his supporters get. His supporters are fully in his corner constantly. Where does that reckoning come when their information is that he is doing wonderfully? You know, we tend to think in San Francisco with our progressives and our moderates that we live in kind of different bubbles, and that in San Francisco we live in a liberal bubble. But quite frankly, we still listen to the facts. His supporters are not listening to facts. So where does that reckoning come from?
Joe, you just asked a question to one of the audience members.
There are a couple of factors to consider. One with respect to unemployment rate, 3.8%. That's fabulous. Unemployment's low. We know that. If you dive into those unemployment figures a bit more, you find out that 10% of the workforce is working 2 or more jobs. Okay? So these are not people sitting back at $250,000 a year saying life is good. And a lot of that has to do with the gig economy. And, you know, you look at these Uber drivers, these Lyft drivers, these people who are working at home, contract workers, and they don't have benefits. And this economy is great for a lot of people, but there's a sector that's been left behind, which gets me to the next point. The tariffs. You're absolutely right. A story in today's Wall Street Journal, just on the steel tariffs alone, related to the Harley-Davidson thing. They alone will lose 1,000 jobs here, net loss. Okay, these are the folks who voted for Trump, by the way, which is kind of interesting. 450,000 jobs are expected to go just because of the steel tariffs. That's not all the other tariffs out there. And so this is an interesting situation where 6 months from now, this economy may be in a far worse shape than it is right now. And why do I say that? Because like it or not, at the end of the day, people vote their wallets more than anything else. They vote their wallets more than immigration, more than civil rights, more than gun control. All those things are blips. Mm-hmm. What am I taking home? Mm-hmm. And if these tariffs take off the way they do, he may not be able to recover.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Let's let that be the last word and move on to local politics. I know you all thought the mayoral election here was over. I don't think it's ever over. So let's just get into this. We, of course, lost our mayor. We had a mayor who automatically took that position, then she was forced out, and then the guy who followed her is not running, and then she won the election in a very close nail-biter. That's, by the way, the best analysis you'll ever hear. Now, Joe's been covering this right up front, his vantage point at the Examiner. Joe, Mayor-elect London Breed, recently announced she was stepping down as board president earlier than expected, and this caused a kerfuffle. Explain why that's interesting or important. Or if you agree it's important, maybe it's not.
You know, I don't know that it is. So the Board of Supervisors, as it is now, of San Francisco, is divided into moderate Democrats and progressive Democrats, right? And with a 6-5 majority leaning towards the moderates for now. But in July, a new supervisor who just won his election at the same time London Breed won her mayoral election. His name is Raphael Mandelman, won District 8. Anyone Castro, Noe Valley? No? Anybody? Oh, we got one. So Mandelman will tip that balance of power towards the progressives. Now, this is really key, because once you have that 6-5 majority, oh boy, can you write laws. You can write laws that will get that 6-5 majority. You'll pass them pretty easily. But without a board president, you will have someone who can kind of stymie you in committees. So the board president can make committee assignments. They can assign people who can jam you up legislatively. They can kind of take control of where that law is going. And that's why they're kind of wrestling over this board presidency. So London Breed, now, if following the rules as they normally go, would have become mayor, and then all of a sudden the board would have had to vote a new president. If that happened in July, the progressives would have had that vote, 6-5. But because she stepped down early, boom, moderates have that vote. And that's being decided right now as we speak, as we sit here. It's happening right now. Yeah. The word I have on the wind is that its supervisor, Malia Cohen, may have it on lock. She represents District 10, which is the Bayview and Hunters Point. Progressives and moderates may be coalescing around her. But this is a big deal because, as I was telling you kind of earlier, back before we got on stage, the progressives are really going to use this time during London's first time in her mayorship to lob kind of grenades at her. They're going to say, we're going to give you laws, taxes on tech, new regulations on scooters, that kind of thing, that you may not want and that she may try to veto. But she's going to have a weird choice because they're going to give her laws where if she vetoes them, she may look bad publicly. But her allies, the people who helped her financially to get into office, may not want her to see them pass. For instance, she took, London Breed was supported by about $3 million in this election. Mr. Mark Leno and Jane Kim both had far less funding, and a lot of that funding came from outside independent spending, much like the Koch brothers funded super PACs that we see nationally. We see, oh, what a cute dog. We see that locally with Ron Conway, a billionaire angel investor who invested early in Google and Airbnb and Ask Jeeves, if anyone remembers Ask Jeeves.
They don't all win.
Yeah, right. They can't all be gold. And he was a major financial backer in her previous runs and sent a letter asking all of his tech friends, CEOs, please donate to London Breed, donate to London Breed. And they did in tens of thousands and far more than that, bolstering her outside spending to about $1 million. So now here's the question. Will London Breed side with the folks that helped fund her campaigns, or will she allow legislation to curtail tech in San Francisco to go through? And tech, if not homelessness and housing, is certainly among one of the biggest things, one of the biggest issues hitting San Francisco of this age.
And just part of the dynamic that needs to be evaluated is, many of the people in here are from San Francisco that had been established for, since the 70s, 80s, 90s. With Ed Lee, since 2010, between 2010 and 2014, 400,000 of the people that were here in the 70s, 80s, and 90s and O's left.
Yep.
400,000.
Yep.
And an additional 400,000 plus came in. So under Ed Lee, there has been a net of in terms of displacement and new citizens, 900,000 turnover. That combined, that is more than the gold rush and World War II migration combined. 500,000 and 300,000 still doesn't touch the 900,000. So Ed Lee had a revolutionary impact on the everyday people. And a lot of that is evident in the vote that London Breed won across the city, because I think the Matt Gonzalez voter, the Jane Kim voter, doesn't have the same influence that the Ed Lee voter does now. And that's why I think London, even though it was the ranked choice voting system, tweaked out, because she won throughout the city, 9 of 11 districts. And I said this on Channel 2, that she had a mandate. And
no
David
way.
Campos was like, no. And I'm like, yeah, well, if you go outright with the ranked choice voting system, as he wrote in the article, David Campos, she won by just 1%, then of course. But if you acknowledge the fact that she won that double digits the first time around, won the second time around, when you look over in Oakland, that didn't happen for Don Parada. She won the first time and the second time and most of the city. So, in other words, she has a mandate in the conventional sense, but of course with ranked choice voting, it says she won by 1%, not 11 out of the 9 out of the 11 districts.
And
I won disagreement.
You're killing me. So
Joe disagrees.
Two things. First off, people voted the way they voted because they anticipated the ranked choice voting system. If voters knew that there was a one-time vote and then we'd have a runoff, you don't know how they would have voted. That it could have come out completely differently. You might have seen a far different margin on those first choice votes. The other thing is that she didn't receive a majority in a majority of districts. I love this. I love playing games with numbers or seeing other people do it. And so the games with numbers that you saw immediately after the election was people going, look at all the districts London won. She won D10. She won D9. She won a plurality, but not a majority. She got 30% in those districts, not 50 or above. She got 30 to 25. Those are very close numbers.
With ranked choice voting or without?
No, without. Without even beforehand. They're very close numbers in a lot of these districts. So the idea that she won a majority of districts to me is just like poppycock, because she won, if you'll pardon an older term, but she won a plurality, not a majority, and they're far different concepts. And that said, her mandate is not quite as clear, because a lot of people were for all the candidates, holding their nose and going, okay. There's not one symptom of the ranked choice voting system, and there are many pluses and many minuses, but one symptom, and you can like this or not, is that people tend to make their messages kind of even out in a ranked choice voting system. I want you to vote for me number 1, but if you're going to vote for me, not going to vote my number 1, I want you to vote me number 2 or 3. And because that's the case, you want everyone to kind of like you even just a little bit. So you don't fight. You don't disagree, as we are now. They didn't do this. I went to so many debates, and they didn't do this.
Right.
Because they don't want to be looked at as if they're disagreeing.
Yeah.
And so their politics kind of went, meh.
Yeah.
Even if in reality, their politics are like,
Yeah, but I agree with you. I would just add that the voters had plenty of time to give London the thumbs down if they wanted to. They had ample time as president. They had ample time after Ed Lee passed, when Mark Farrell came in. They had ample time through polls to express non-support. When they were allowed to show their political choice or will, again, through the gaming, through the system, London Breed came out on top. So I think as far as she's concerned, the way she's interpreting it is that she has a widespread mandate throughout the city.
She has a mandate like Trump had a mandate.
well, that's the thing, is that there is another election in 2019, so she's playing defense. And what's interesting is when, you know, and you guys know this, when you see a politician who's about to fight another election, you see them kind of move on some things. And we saw this when London Breed was running against a progressive lefty challenger in her district, Dean Preston, in District 5, just, you know, some years back. You know, the same London Breed who initially voted against stronger protections of apartments from people flipping them for Airbnbs, right? You know, we see this problem now, right? You see the lock boxes on your doors in the neighborhoods when you walk by. Those are people renting out their apartments on Airbnb. Sometimes a landlord evicts an elderly person and says, you know what, I can make more money renting down an Airbnb. We had tighter protections coming down the line from Mr. Campos, actually, to make sure that didn't happen. And she voted against them. But when she was up against a more progressive challenger, Mr. Preston, all of a sudden she was the one proposing a harder cap on those Airbnbs. Darn those Airbnbs, though it was vetoed ultimately by Mayor Ed Lee. Here's a question. Do the progressives reintroduce London's 90-day cap on Airbnb and put it before her? Oh, London, now that you're mayor, now you get to be the one who does or does not veto that Airbnb protection. Now they're putting her on record with her own thing.
No, good point.
You could see this very well happen. They're going to put her to the test.
Yeah, but I think she blew the first blood with this move. In other words, when she won the election finally, if you listen to what she said on the steps of the city hall, she says, I'm moving forward. This is not necessarily about what happened in this election before. She didn't say it's not about. She says it's not necessarily about. And I said, ooh, London mad at somebody, and she's got a list. And this act is an aggressive act.
Yeah.
It almost stillborns her presidency, her mayoralty, in terms,
wishful thinking there.
Right, I know, right? In terms of her being able to really impact policy with this progressive dynamic.
Certainly it can affect her working with that board, but for folks on the progressive end of the Board of Supervisors to be upset by this, come on, they pulled the thing back in January. I mean, what are they going to say? Hey, you're running the scam. That's our scam. We were running it. We're going to have a lot to follow this.
I don't think they were too twisted up about it, personally. One or two of them.
Let's move on to our next topic, and it also involves hypocrisy. And there are two question cards from the audience I want to read, and because it's actually better than the intro stuff I had written. This involves the Red Hand incident. This was where Sarah Huckabee Sanders was asked to leave, told to leave. She wasn't going to get served there. Someone writes, I first thought that the restaurant owner did a terrific thing. Then I wondered, is this going to pave the way for yet more discrimination of groups that have already been harmed? And then someone else writes, if a restaurant can refuse service to Sarah Sanders based on political grounds, why can't a bakery refuse to serve a cake for a gay wedding, also on political grounds, or, as you saw in another case, provide flowers? Thoughts? I mean, that sets up...
Yeah, Maxine Waters is in the front of it, right? And you know, basically calling for people to confront people publicly. And again, I have a real problem with that.
Why?
Because people should have the right to be left alone and unmolested when they go out in public in terms of, I'm going out to eat with my family. That's one thing. If you see me walking into the Capitol building or the City Hall, have at it. These, you know, again, I'm assuming that Democrats don't want this to happen to Democrats when they come into power.
Right.
If someone did this to Michelle Obama or Valerie Jarrett, racism would be the #1 charge. So I think, in a real way, I'm surprised he did this in Virginia. They did this in Virginia, even though it's a blue state right now, kind of purple, but it's still very conservative throughout the counties. I thought there'd be a fierce backlash. Even I anticipated arson at some point at the building. But again, that's me paying attention to American history. We'll see what happens.
That town happens to be Lexington, I think it was called. That town is a very, very liberal town.
Okay.
In a very, very conservative county.
Okay.
Which was interesting in itself. But there's some issues here. I mean, the question is well put. How should she be, the owner, any different than the baker? And if that's the standard, then I think the owner has every right to say, I'm sorry, I'm not comfortable serving you here. My people are uncomfortable, and so my employees, and so I'm asking you to leave. Which, by the way, I think she did very politely. Even Sarah Huckabee Sanders said that. But the other issue, I agree. These elected people are public people. They don't have lives of their own. And, it's one thing if you go up to them and say, I'm sorry to bother you for a minute, but could I get your autograph, or could I ask you this one quick question? It's another thing to boo somebody and chase them out. That's almost vigilantism. Yeah. And I just think that's we use this word a lot, but I'll say that's un-American.
Yeah.
Where do you draw the line, though? That's my question. Where do you draw the line?
It's a tough line to draw.
Even locally. So I just wrote a story about this fellow who owns a local event venue down in South of Market. And he wrote flyers on a homeless encampment threatening to burn and beat them come sundown if they didn't leave. It said, "Attention junkie MFers." And then made those threats. And while he was leaving those flyers threatening to beat and burn them, he pepper sprayed one of the homeless men sleeping in his camp in the face.
That's terrible.
The guy chases after him down. The homeless guy, not defenseless, runs after him with a bat. Then the guy himself, the club owner, pulls out his gun from his car and chases the guy with the gun. Now, some reporting that I did finally outed this guy's name, who he was. His name is Jason Perkins. He owns a brick and mortar in San Francisco and New Parish in Oakland. Now groups are boycotting New Parish and boycotting brick and mortar because this guy has assaulted homeless people, threatened to beat and burn them, and the employee of his that came forward told me and produced text messages from Perkins showing this, that he would know that he asked him to come out there and do that for him. He told me Perkins offered him money to beat this guy up. Should we boycott New Parish and brick and mortar? I don't know about you. I feel pretty much like boycotting brick and mortar and New Parish. But where do you draw that line then?
I think these lines are difficult to draw, but in this case, you're talking about a private citizen went after another private citizen. I mean, boycotting it in that case is a lot different than booing somebody in their establishment. Boycotting is something that someone takes upon themselves, groups, to say we're not going to go here. That's a passive activity. I mean, you're not throwing anything at anybody. You're not, that's something. That's a great boycott.
Even asking her to leave the establishment seems to be like, it's not like they threw stuff at her.
That was the owner. That was the owner,
and he did so quietly.
And she did so quietly, and the conversation. This is a tough one. I quite agree. But I mean, we have to be civil here, people.
It was a civil ask. This is my restaurant. I own it.
And that was civil, but I'm talking about your guy with the bat.
Oh, right. And yet, I'm about to be a hypocrite because as much as I do think people should be allowed to be left alone, I think it was Kirsten Nielsen. Is that her name?
Yeah. The Department of Homeland Security.
As she stood there, with the Cruella de Vil disposition over these horrible this horrible scene, basically trivializing or suggesting we're taking perfectly care of them, we're giving these kids education, et cetera. When she got harassed in the restaurant, the audacity of being in a Mexican restaurant, and then the people were confronting her specifically around what she was doing and her actions, and they said, if they can't eat, you can't eat. If they can't have peace, you can't have peace.
I don't think that's right.
Under that circumstance, I do think she should have been disrupted. Like Donald Trump the other day was walking by the lobby, and some young lady in the hallway yelled out, "Donald Trump, blank you." And hey, you know what? This is America. This is democracy.
I'm not buying it. I think there's something we call civil behavior. And I'm afraid to say to you this, that I don't like saying this, I think we've lost it. Just like that woman the other day who started threatening to call the police because this little girl outside AT&T Park was selling water to people. Give me a break.
Right.
I mean, there's a point where you have to let people live. You know, when Nielsen is making public policy statements and acting in that capacity, even if you don't like it, that's what she's doing. To go to her when she's in public and harass her is no more right than when people were harassing Hillary Clinton at a rally. You know, it isn't right. You must, if you don't like it, leave. Okay?
I don't think those two equate. And, you know, sometimes one act of disobedience, even in a private establishment of a politician, can lead to bigger things. You know, so I went to high school here in San Francisco. I went to Wallenberg High School. One of my classmates, his name is Alejandro Nieto. He was shot 54 times by the SFPD on Bernal Hill and killed when someone thought he had a gun. But actually he had a taser. He was a bouncer. And he was just up there. He was shadowboxing. He was waiting for a bus. And some new white person who lived in the neighborhood and was threatened by a Latino guy in a red jacket, a 49ers jacket, who was shadowboxing on the hill, scared the bejesus out of him. He called 911. So he was shot and killed. And one guy, a local rapper by the name of Equipto, shouted down Mayor Ed Lee, the late Mayor Ed Lee, may rest in peace, while he was eating in a restaurant.
I remember that.
Yeah, you guys remember this? It was a viral moment.
He called him a sellout, didn't he?
He called him a sellout.
Yeah.
He called him a sellout. And it was really a kind of a viral moment that, you know, he personally called out Ed Lee in a restaurant while Ed Lee was eating his dinner. And you know what? It led to an upswell of support for Equipto. It led to an upswell of support for his cause. Equipto became later one of the Frisco Five, who you guys may remember was a hunger striker outside Mission Station, SFPD Mission Station here in San Francisco. And that led to the ouster of Chief of Police Greg Suhr, which you may or may not agree with, but under Greg Suhr's leadership, you know, people of color were being shot and killed by SFPD. My friend Alejandro Nieto, a black woman who had, stolen a truck, yes, but they shot her out of policy. Mario Woods, who was, you know, basically surrounded and shot by a firing squad. And this one act in the restaurant was almost one that led to a snowballing of political acts that led to the ouster of this police chief.
And see, I agree. It's like, what do we, again, Rosa Parks was protesting on a bus. That was inconvenient for everybody else, right? Colin Kaepernick.
Hold on,
Kaepernick.
There, hold on.
Okay, go ahead.
When she protested, or when Colin Kaepernick protested, they didn't bother anybody. They didn't say anything.
The very idea of them just doing what they were doing was bothersome. Whether they bothered anybody or not is secondary.
Excuse me. We call that civil disobedience.
Right.
You know that.
Right.
And civil disobedience, if you don't like what's going on in the restaurant, you could just sit there or leave. It's a lot different than name calling and chasing somebody out. Yeah. There's a difference here.
No, I think Rosa Parks sitting on that bus, just the idea that she had the audacity to not give up her seat was as troublesome as if she yelled out, "I don't want to give up my seat."
But she didn't.
Right. But she was still offensive and in the wrong place and arrested for it.
It's okay.
So
That's okay.
I still like my rapper.
Then you take Colin Kaepernick, and again, it's what is appropriate protest? When is it appropriate? Is it appropriate now for him to take a knee because it's during the anthem, even though he's not even relating his actions to the anthem or the flag, but everyone else seems to, or or should he do it at a different time? We can't seem to agree as a country what is appropriate.
Let's try to get through some more audience questions before we get to the news quiz. If I owned a printing press and a Nazi group wanted me to print their posters, I would not want them to do so. I mean, I would not want to do that service. Does anyone have a problem with me saying, no, I won't provide that service?
I think the Supreme Court is probably going to uphold you on that. I think so. Mm-hmm. But I think those are the kinds of issues that we're working through right now. Some of these things are in real time. You know, I mean, there's a point where you have to serve somebody, because he or she is gay or black or Norwegian or whatever. Okay, and there's a point
Norwegian,
where you
man.
can't. We don't have to.
You got to let go with Norway.
I'm loving
They're
it.
going to call you later.
I'm loving it.
Frankly, I wouldn't want to buy a cake from someone I knew despised me,
Right,
but
right.
Uh,
God knows
this
what'd
is-
be in it.
Yeah, and as I said, I started off by saying this is an issue with hypocrisy, and I don't even mean that critically, because I think we can all talk ourselves into, I can understand this side.
Right, right.
Boy, would I do this,
Right.
you know, and that such. So thank you all for taking part in that. Someone writes, filthy restaurant at Mar-a-Lago? What do you expect for a lousy $200,000 membership fee?
Wow.
That can go without a comment. Someone else writes, how do we communicate to Republicans that MS-13 poses much less risk than death by golf balls? I don't know. If
I don't think we
statistically-
can. I think MS-13 serves the same purpose that Willie Horton served.
I was just going to go there, yeah.
Just put it out there, and it will. I was a black boy in 1988, and Willie Horton scared the hell out of me. So I knew he scared average America on a daily basis during the campaign the last 2 weeks when George Bush was losing the constant inundation. And it worked because he went from behind Dukakis to passing Dukakis. Trump is relying on this sort of default kind of tribalism he's hoping will kick in. Not from his base. And I think that's the deception. It's not his base. People keep blaming his base as if his base is this group of clan, as if he had 66 million people. But he had 66 million people that supported him, and then there was 100 million Americans that didn't vote at all. But if he is reelected, then I think it says more about America than the fact that he, like London Breed, like here in San Francisco, gamed the system.
This would be the Americans electing him and not the Russians.
Right.
You got a
He said
self-serving
that.
answer. More news is the answer. When you don't just get your news from Fox News, you get a plurality of sources. All of a sudden, those people are magically more informed about facts of everyday life.
And you can follow him online at Fitz the Reporter on Twitter. Have you discussed Melania's coat yet? Quote, I don't really care, do you? What did you think about that?
I don't really care, do you?
But I do.
Okay. Do you think that was really her comment about the kids?
Because,
Or that
again,
was what
this
Donald
is
Trump
race.
said to
It
her?
seems like it has nothing to do with race.
Nobody knows
It seems
what
like it has
means.
nothing to do with race. But and this is not Republican, Democrat, put that jacket on Michelle Obama, and Obama is taken out of the White House in cuffs. There would be such a reaction. That was worse than let them eat cake. That was let them eat cake with 2 middle fingers up. Now, the media has done her a favor and nuanced it and tried to trouble it and suggested that one finger was for Donald Trump and the other one, well, she didn't really mean. That's what they're telling us. I don't care, do you? When I'm going to see starving children being taken from their mothers? Please. There's no other way of looking at that other than she had the audacity, it might be illegally herself,
It might be
to go comfort children
Effed up.
with this on her back. And I'm sorry to be emotional, but I'm sorry, this is vulgar.
completely other topic. We know Paul Ryan is headed for the exit, probably some very lucrative lobbyist job. Who do you think is the likely next speaker if the Republicans retain the House?
Probably not going to be Kevin McCarthy.
Not going to be.
Probably not, because of a very big strategic error. Because if Ryan was going to leave go of that job as early as he said he was, while still holding on to it,
Yeah.
I'm not going to run for re-election, but I'm going to stay speaker. That gives people an opportunity, especially the Freedom Caucus, to work with others to get their person in. On the other hand, if Ryan said, I'm quitting the speakership tomorrow or next week, I want Kevin McCarthy to be speaker, I think at that point McCarthy could have won. But I think whatever
Ryan?
likelihood he had of winning, that's gone. And I think you may see someone the likes of Scalise win, and if not Scalise win, Mark Meadows of the Freedom Caucus.
Does Louis Gohmert have a chance?
Does who?
Louis Gohmert? He's Michelle Bachmann without the...
Yeah, no, I don't think so.
Okay.
I don't think so.
More likely, Nancy Pelosi will be the next speaker. Any thoughts?
That's another good question.
Oh,
You know,
I
the
don't think
interesting
so.
thing about this is you realize, of course, just for a moment here, if McCarthy becomes speaker, let's just say, it'll be the first time in history that one state had both the speaker and the minority leader. Or if Pelosi becomes speaker and McCarthy gets in, it'll be the first time in history that one state. And talk about the power that would accrue to the congressional delegations from the state. It's pretty massive. But I think the chances of Pelosi, I think, are 50-50.
Wow. Any thoughts? Joe, James? Joe?
I'm just reminded by the fact that, you know, we have such incredible politicians that come out of San Francisco. I mean, we look at the local San Francisco politics, we're talking about tech and progressives versus moderates, and I could already hear some eyes rolling when I said progressives versus moderates. But that bloodbath of a political system that we have here really does produce people who are sharper than sharp.
And that might explain why Northern California tends to dominate the state's politics and the democratic politics of the state. When you compare, say, Nancy Pelosi, Dianne Feinstein, Barbara Boxer, Kamala Harris, Gavin Newsom, Willie Brown, he's still around, and still holding power. You know,
Jerry Brown.
you compare that to Jerry Brown.
Always mayor.
Well,
These people are all legends except Kamala 30, 40 years ago in this state, and they've all come back to serve whether you like it or not. Yeah. So it's really phenomenal that, again, we could write an article just on the Northern California domination of Southern California in terms of politics. And for example, how Antonio Villaraigosa lost to Gavin Newsom in LA County. And what that implies for the state's politics.
Mrs. Villaraigosa's vote.
So I think, you know, again, I'm excited about I'm a New Yorker who lives in Oakland. I'm excited about that dynamic because I went to graduate school at USC down in LA. So to see Northern California kind of dominate the state's politics for like the last, I don't know, since 1992, 1994, the year of the woman election, 92 rather, or the year of the woman election, when Boxer and all these others came in, it's been really phenomenal to watch the past 25 years of Northern California dominating the state's politics. And Southern California they have a few people on the rise, I think, but not to the quality of Northern Californians.
Well, we'll have a lot more news quiz questions and obviously a lot more to talk about in 3 weeks on Monday, July 16th for our next week-to-week program. Thank you to our great panel today, Dr. Larry Gersten, Joe Fitzgerald Rodriguez, and Dr. James Taylor. Thanks for all of you here for us joining us tonight, listening online and watching on TV. Have a great rest of your week.
It was a pleasure. That was fun.
Thank you.
That was good.
No,